You take a seed and you put it in your back pocket. You can carry that around forever, and nothing's going to grow. Doesn't matter how great the seed is, nothing's going to grow. And so Jesus only told one parable that I know of that had to do with the quality of the seed. The sower sowed seeds, wheat and tares. But he talked a lot about soil and about the responsibility we have to cultivate what he gave us. And so sometimes we have these amazing experiences. We come to conferences, we come to church, or it can be over lunch or whatever, and God deposits all the seed in our life, and there's a potential for a great orchard. And we're praying, Lord, I pray for increase. I pray for, these things that happen in my life. And instead of the Lord handing me fruit or a tree, he hands me a seed. How many know that the tree never looks like the seed? Back up. How many know that the tree never looks like the seed? So I'm praying for this fruit in my life. I'm praying for whatever it is, breakthrough in a certain area. Maybe it's finances. And I say, Lord, I need finances. I need money. I need to break the spirit of poverty over me. And the Lord sends me this seed. And I'm like, no, that's awesome. Thank you for that. But I need money. And the Lord's all, if you plant this seed and cultivate it, it will turn into money. You know what I'm trying to say? And so I think it's the same way with everything that God gives us. It's important that we steward the grace that's given to us. Paul said this in Ephesians 3. If indeed you've heard of the stewardship of God's grace, which was given to me for you. Say this. Say, God has made me a steward of his grace, and it's for you. God makes us a steward of grace, just like, oftentimes we think of stewards as the steward of money. We have the story of the talents. One got 5, one got 3. And the guy who didn't steward his money, his talents, it was actually a sum of money, I think in our standards, around $10,000. He didn't steward that well. He got afraid, he buried it, and the Lord took it away from him and gave it to the one who had 5, which ended up being 10, which now is 11. And what I'm getting at is this, is that the Lord likes us to steward the things that he gives us. And I think that the difference between people who actually have many gifts and have a very fruitful life, and the person who doesn't have much fruit in their life is actually not how much seed they have, but what they've actually done with it. And you can have just a little bit of seed, but if you plant that seed in the ground and let it grow, do you understand? In the fruit, there's more seed. If you're jealous of someone else's orchard, it's possible they started out with one seed that they were faithful with. And Paul said to Timothy, take these things I have entrusted to you and give them to faithful men, faithful women, faithful people. And so I think that faithfulness is a quality that God wants to instill in our life. And so many times we look at other people and we're like, well, they're amazing. But if you listen to their story, it's not that they had a different experience than most of us did. It's that they did something with their experience that most of us didn't do. Are you following me? I've told this story so many times, but it so solidifies what it is I'm trying to say. Years and years and years ago, I had an experience where I was in the bathtub and I was praying, where I always did. It wasn't anything really like super spiritual or anything. I read my Bible and prayed in the bathtub because it's the only room in the house that locked, and we had 4 teenagers. So it was nothing spiritual about it. And the Lord, in a vision, walked into the bathroom. And he talked to me for a half an hour. And this was many years ago. It was probably 25, 26, 27 years ago. And it was astounding, the things he was telling me. Now, this was 3 years after a nervous breakdown I had that lasted 3.5 years. We were living in a little town of Weaverville, and I owned a service station, a gas station. But he talked to me, and he said, I've called you to be a prophet to the nations. Now, we didn't throw around the word prophet much. We had 2 prophets in our lives that I knew of, and that was Dick Mills and Dick Joyce. And we knew of a few guys that we reverently called prophets, but we didn't know them personally. And so that title, it wasn't as common as we would say now. Well, that person's a prophet, or we just had Bob come up and I introduced him as a prophet. It was not common for us to call someone a prophet. And so the Lord said, I've called you to be a prophet. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to walk out of this room and say that for sure. But he said, I've called you to speak to presidents and prime ministers and mayors and governors and queens and kings. And he gave me this whole word. And it was really powerful. It was more experience than a word even. And he talked to me about my life's destiny and where I was going. And it was so huge, so much bigger than I had ever thought of or I had ever prayed about. Like, I hadn't thought about that. I'd never thought about being a prophet. Like, I didn't someday I'd sure like to be a prophet. We got people running around like, well, I think I might be a prophet. That wasn't me. I'm just like, I'm thinking I'm going to be mentally totally stable someday. That was one of the goals I had in my life. And so the Lord's telling me this stuff about my life, and I was so totally and completely in shock. And so he's telling me all the stuff, and I'm just like, first of all, my mind couldn't comprehend it. It was going crazy. My spirit was like, whoa, this is amazing. And this is the part I've told many times, but the Lord turned to go in the vision. I was still just completely in shock. And the Lord turned to go as if he was leaving the room, and he stopped as if he was going to use the door, and he turned back to me, and he looked and he pointed at me, and he said, history will tell us if you believe me. That's what he said to me. History will tell us if you believe me. Now, I don't know what that does to your theology. I wasn't even thinking theologically. I was like, so the Lord leaves, and I sat in there for another half an hour. I'm like, okay, what should I do? Well, first of all, I'm not going to tell anybody, because if I tell somebody, I have had a little problem with arrogance in my life. And I heard the story of Joseph, and that didn't work out too good for Joe. You walk out of the bathroom and say, well, I'm supposed to be in charge of this place. I don't know what you guys are going to be doing. Yeah, that didn't work out too good for him. Thought there's got to be another route besides the pit prison palace. But the part that really stuck with me is when he said, history will tell us if you believe me. And I processed that for weeks. It was like ringing in my head for weeks, or my heart, or somewhere. It was ringing over and over in my mind. Like, history will tell us if you believe me. And so I'm like, well, this is really a strange prophecy. I didn't have a picture for this. Like, to me, this was my paradigm for prophecy. If the Lord prophesies to you, it's done, and you can't stop it from happening. But that experience told me that God had a plan for my life, and he gave me everything I needed to make sure that plan came to pass, but I still had to do something. I still had to co-labor with him to see that happen. And so I began to say to myself and to God in prayer, I have to say that he didn't speak to me like that for years again. I mean, he spoke to me, but not like that. I mean, I never had another encounter like that for many years. And so I wrote down everything I could think of, and then I said to myself, okay, what can I do? Like, I know that if I try to make it happen, I'm going to end up with Ishmael. You know Ishmael? Ishmael, Abraham and Sarah decided to try to make God's promise happen. That was a really bad plan. So I was trying to find my way through this tension. Like, if I go and make this happen, first of all, I couldn't. I didn't know the president's phone number or anything. So, we didn't have a mayor. So I wasn't sure how I'd make it happen anyway. But one of the verses that would kind of echo in my spirit was, the horse was prepared for the day of battle, but the victory belonged to the Lord. I'm like, okay, that's a great principle right there. The horse was prepared for the day of battle, but the victory still belonged to the Lord. So I'm like, okay, I can prepare myself, but I can't call people and say, hey, the Lord gave me this word. Do you guys know a president or a prime minister? Or, are you friends with anybody? I can get invited. I knew that was like self-promotion. That was going to be a bad plan. I watched Absalom do that. That didn't work out good for him either. Sort of hung by his head, if you know what I mean. Hung by his head, you get it? Okay, so I knew that wasn't going to work either. So I just started saying, okay, well, first of all, I don't know anything about being a prophet. So before I speak to kings, I probably ought to work on that. Like, that's probably a good plan. Maybe I should start with prophecy. Like, that would probably be a better plan. Like, it would be a bummer to get into there, into see a president and then, like, have no word. It's like, especially with my education, there isn't much else I could tell him. If I didn't have a word, there isn't like, I've been thinking about the, do you know anything about quantum physics? Yeah, me neither. Yeah. I don't know about the Russians. You know anything about the Russians? Yeah, me neither. So I don't really have anything to say if I got in there and I couldn't prophesy. So I just started to read every book I could get on prophetic ministry. I'm not telling you a method. I'm sharing with you, like, that you need to steward what God gives you. Like, the most important thing is that you're faithful with what you have. I only have a seed. Well, that doesn't matter. I only have, 2 fishes and 4 loaves. Well, it doesn't matter what you don't have. It only matters what you do with what you have. Do you know what I'm saying? So my exhortation is that we would take what God's given us and that we would be faithful with it. However small that is, however big that is, that we would be faithful with it. And I've watched the people around us, many of them that you respect, and I've watched their lives and, shared so many times the story, Bill and watching Danny, and we all grew up together. And I watched, there was lots of other young men and women around us with the same experiences, and many of them didn't do anything. There's some sad stories we rarely tell from the podium of people who got the same seed that we did, sat in the same meetings we sat in, and some of those people aren't even walking with God today. And so, and I think of the difference between them and some of the folks that are leading this movement, and I'm like, it really, and I know I joke around a lot, but it's really not talent. It was faithfulness. Some people took the seed and they were faithful with the seed. And they took whatever it is that they got, whether it was a little or whether it was a lot. And obviously, we all start out at different places. But they cultivated that seed. They were faithful with it. And that seed grew. And they took that seed that grew, and if you will, they took what they needed for bread and they planted the rest. And the orchard got larger and larger and larger. And lots of people want to kill giants, but they won't protect the sheep. They run when the wolf comes, when the lion and the bear comes. They run away. And they're like, you know what? If I was protecting people, I would be faithful. And God's like, no. If you can't protect sheep, you won't protect them. Like, if you won't do something, if you won't take care of the little job I gave you, you really won't. Some people are like, if I had a lot of money, I would give. If you have a little and you don't give, you won't give when you have a lot. It's actually harder, believe it or not. The more money you have, it sounds strange, but the harder it is to give. And it really is true that what you do with a little, you will do with a lot. The habits you have when you have a little, those are the habits that you have when you have. And Jesus said, if you're not faithful with unrighteous mammon, or if you will, if you're not faithful with earthly money, who's going to give you the kingdom? Who's going to give you riches of the kingdom if you can't take care of natural stuff well? And so I do believe that you can do something about what God's given you and that it matters. I understand that there's a place of sovereignty where God just says, I'm doing this and you can't stop me. I get that. I understand that this wouldn't fit every single thing. But most often God co-labors with us. Most often God goes, this is my plan for you, and then he waits for us to do something with it. And so I just want to pray for and I want to pray for you. I'll finish my sentence. Sorry. I want to pray for you. I just had this picture in my my mind of lots of people carrying seed, and you're proud of how much seed you have. Like, I have this picture of a guy that had seed bags, like they were like hanging off his belt, but he had no crop ever. And he was bragging about how much seed he had. And he's going from conference to conference and school to school getting seed. I just had this vision just now. That's not God's plan for the body of Christ. I'd rather have a little bit of seed planted than bags of seed sitting on a shelf doing nothing and bragging about, let me show you, show me your seed, I'll show you mine. Like, this is my Toronto seed. This is my Morning Star seed. This is my Bethel seed. Who really gives a rip? Really? If you're not going to do anything with it, what good is it? And ultimately, the Lord's going to give that seed to someone else if you don't. Someone who will cultivate it. Someone who will do something with it. And so, I just want to exhort you to do something with what you have. Do something with what you have.